Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and Little Rock Public Radio.
Hello again, everyone, and thanks very much for being with us. It has been a vexing several weeks for Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. At the top of her list of troubles, what's come to be known as Podium Gate, or sometimes Lectern Gate. Who was the intended purchaser? Who was the vendor? Why the price? A local story quickly went national, and to complicate matters for the administration, the legislative branch has directed its own auditors to review the purchase. Senator Jimmy Hickey, Republican of Texarkana, made the formal request.
You know, my reasoning for this is right or wrong, you know, that this issue with the lectern, podium, whatever anybody wants to call it, it's been convoluted that it goes along with what happened in the special session with FOIA. And I think you all have probably heard the same thing that I've heard. You know, well, could that have possibly been made a security type issue because it contains Kevlar and is bulletproof or whatever? So then, of course, we've got all of the timeline that has to deal with, you know, when the Republican Party, you know, reimbursed and all that, which leg audit needs to look at. But what further, you know, what I believe further does, where we need to look at everything that we made, you know, back to the retroactive date, is the fact that on that podium purchase, whether it was a coincidence or whether it was not, that I know that the Senate, that we adjourned on 10:02 on the 14th of September. We had a bill signing that was somewhere probably close to noon. And then I found out, you know, even this week that reimbursement was actually done the same day that we left out of here. So, you know, that reimbursement needs to be looked at.
And more. At Ms. Sanders' request, the legislature in special session amended the Arkansas Freedom of Information Act. It was a compromise version. And now a citizens organization is campaigning to not only restore the Freedom of Information Act to much of its previous language, but enshrine it, as it were, in the Arkansas Constitutional. And some additional incoming involving reductions in the state Medicaid rolls and the first numbers on the LEARNS Act and private school enrollment. So, here to update those stories and more, Andrew DeMello, Capitol Bureau Chief of the Associated Press, Josie Lenora of Little Rock Public Radio, and independent journalist Steve Bronner. And thanks to everybody for coming in. Steve, we'll start with you. It's been kind of a bumpy road for the administration, the governor, the last couple of 3 weeks.
It has been, you know, policy-wise, a highly successful legislative session. Got the LEARNS Act passed, got the prison reform bill, prison building bill done, and her national profile remains high, and she gets all the national press she could probably want, right, from friendly outlets. This has percolated now for several weeks. There are a lot of dots. This $19,000 podium purchase, and the bouncing around of who paid for it between the state and the Republican Party of Arkansas. Coupled all that with the Freedom of Information Act request by Matt Campbell, a Blue Hog report. The Arkansas State Police not immediately complying. And then you mix that in with the special session, which was included on Friday. We learned that FOI would be included, and there were major changes for the next Monday special session. All right. Ended up getting the humongous response, and then that's right now. We have a whole bunch of dots. We don't know what they connect to. We don't know if it's nothing. There's very likely that the so-called cover-up is more than whatever happened. But at the moment, we're still trying to figure out what's going to happen, and at least now we have the legislature on the case, whatever that means.
Yeah, Josie.
One thing that was interesting about the Joint Auditing Committee yesterday is everyone was in agreement that the audit's just going to show what it shows. The governor's been a little inconsistent on her answers about what happened with the podium purchase. We know it was purchased with a state credit card. It was reimbursed, but it took about 3 months for that reimbursement to happen. And the timeline's really interesting because it happened right after those documents were FOIA'd. So we'll have to see what happens as we go forward with this audit.
Yeah, Andrew DeMello, it seems that at a minimum here, among other things that's going on, General Assembly, the legislature, at least some elements of it, seems to be asserting itself as it has not really in the since the governor took office.
Yeah, I think the fact that you saw the request for the audit on the podium go through, really pretty easily through executive committee. A little bit of pushback on the second part of the audit, looking at security and travel records, I think is very telling. And legislative audit, we have to remember, is it's an agency that it's viewed pretty favorably by both Republicans and Democrats, and it has very broad powers. They have subpoena power for documents and witnesses, and they really are known for going, very, very detailed into records, and they have experience with this. They do more than 1,000 audits of, state government agencies, local governments, school districts, and the fact that this is expedited. This is still going to drag out some, but we may see possibly some answers by the end of the year, but it's still unclear is this going to be as muddled at the end of this as it is right now? Are some of these dots not going to be connected? And then the question is, what happens then? Who else looks into it? And what are the next steps?
Well, there's this aspect too of it, Andrew, is it not? The joint audit has always had, as you mentioned, a high degree of credibility. It's respected on both sides of the aisle, as it were.
Yeah, that's correct. They're known as being a very thorough agency for looking at things. The one thing that could complicate this is the vendor that is listed as the seller of the lectern. Beckett Events LLC in Virginia, they're out of state. And is that going to be complicated in terms of legislative audits' ability to get records and get information from them? And that's the big question, because at this point, Beckett Events has not responded to any questions, has not responded to inquiries from a large number of reporters asking about what justified the cost of this $19,000 lectern that appears considerably higher priced than any other lectern that you can find online.
And purchased from an agent or a vendor that is not known for selling podiums or lecterns.
Yeah, correct. You look on their website, that's not a service that you find on there. And so that's one of the other questions. And also the question of, why an out-of-state vendor for this rather than someone in state. The state Democrats even made a point of showing that the lectern that they used for their event on Medicaid the other day cost $5 from state surplus.
Well, at a minimum, Josie, Steve, this is a distraction that no administration wants. Ms. Sanders has issued a statement repeatedly. Yeah, bring on the audit, or welcome the audit. Jump on it. We're ready. But it's still something. It's not something that any administration wants to have to deal with.
It's not just the $19,000 price tag, too. There was also a $500 credit card fee that was within that. And so a lot of that's just kind of, I think, a little mysterious for people to wrap their heads around for a podium. And it also looks a lot like the podium that she used during her inauguration. So I think there's just a lot of looming questions that we all have about the podium or the lectern and what it all means.
Yeah.
The whole thing is just so curious. Yeah. Like, no evidence of something like major at this point. Just what is going on, and why did they pay $19,000 for a podium to somebody that doesn't sell podiums? It's all just very curious, and we don't have the answers yet. Was it due for her relationship with the legislature? Well, we were talking about that a minute ago. It was the legislators who got yelled at in the committee meetings. She was not as directly involved, so it may be easier for them to feel the need to address this. And so that's why you had the request. Senator Hickey is a banker by trade, numbers guy. Maybe he has wanted to get to the bottom of this. So that's where we are right now.
Yeah, we will continue to follow. On another issue, updated, well, before we go on to that, we need to talk about the FO. There is now a citizens organization with some obvious bipartisan support to strengthen the FOI, actually by removing it from the statute books and putting it into the Constitution. Joseph?
David Couch and Nate Bell are on opposite sides of the political aisle, so it's really interesting that they've joined up on this. They both have the exact same value, which is their really strong belief that FOIA is something that makes our democracy better. They both really support FOIA. And what I think is interesting about this constitutional amendment is it doesn't just make FOIA enshrined in our Constitution, it takes us back to the FOIA laws that we had before the special session. So the laws that were passed would have bar us from accessing this governor's security information, which would be changed.
And that will still be under the proposed amendment as drafted now. Steve, that will still be available, but with a time lag on it.
Say again, I didn't get the question.
Joseph.
Can you say it again too?
Yeah, the information on governor security expenses will at some point become available.
I think joint auditing has access to it, but we don't have access to it through the Freedom of Information Act because
under the
Constitution would take away that retroactive part of the bill. It would take everything back to where it's been, and then it would add additional changes. For example, anytime the legislature wants to change the Constitution to make the government less transparent, 2/3 vote, and it automatically goes to the voters the next election to vote on. If they wanted to add an emergency to it, 90% support. And that raises some interesting questions because, as we see in the U.S. House of Representatives right now, if something has to have 90% support, it just takes a handful of legislators making their own demands on perhaps unrelated issues to keep it from going through. So, this is really designed to make it very hard for the legislature to make the government less transparent while making it easier to make it more transparent.
Yeah, Andrew DeMillo, there was, during the legislative session, there was an immediate pushback against what the Sanders administration was seeking in terms of the FOI.
Yeah, an immediate pushback and kind of strange bedfellows where you had, transparency advocates, media groups, some conservatives speaking out against it. And I think that's kind of the interesting thing with this ballot measure is seeing this collection of people across the political spectrum. The big question is, what resources are they going to have? Because you need to have money to be able to do signature gathering and also to deal with potential legal challenges, which I think you might face for trying to get this on the ballot. But it also poses an interesting question, too, is even if it doesn't make the ballot or even as they're gathering signatures, this is going to be happening as people are filing for office, as we're getting ready for the primaries next year. Is this going to be an issue where are candidates going to be asked, do you support putting the FOI in the Constitution? And what kind of political fallout would there be for candidates who won't say or are opposed to it?
Well, as always, one of the signal issues in any constitutional amendment is getting the ballot title cleared by the Attorney General and getting it on the ballot, certified for the ballot. That can be, Andrew DeMillo, that can be a pretty steep hill.
Yeah, especially what we've seen with the legislature in recent years. They've made it more difficult to get measures on the ballot. There's been a higher bar. So that's going to be the other question is, are they going to be able to clear that? And that's why I think resources are going to be a big part of it, because as we've seen, some of the measures that we've seen approved in recent years, things like medical marijuana, things like a minimum wage increase, they've had big money behind them. And do you have the same resources that can go behind a pro FOI measure?
Yeah. Steve Bronner.
The Attorney General is famous for handing out his cell phone number at every event that he speaks at. So maybe he would be inclined to be for transparent government if he's going to be consistent with that typical action. So we'll see that if there's going to be an easy way to get this on, or if we have the usual challenges that occur throughout the whole process, the signature collection lawsuits that inevitably occur. We'll see. But Andrew mentioned two different amendments that passed. Both of them were led by David Couch, who is one of those, that is one of the leaders of this group.
He knows what he's doing.
He is good at this. He is. You might say he is the 136th state legislator.
Yeah, and there's also this, though, the Attorney General Griffin, who has to approve the ballot title. He has indicated, though, early on during the session and once it began, that, yeah, maybe the FOI could stand a little tinkering. So Mr. Couch and Mr. Bell, I think both are the two guys, you know, who are behind this movement to move it to the Constitution, the FOI. They have suggested that Mr. Griffin may not be, he may apply extra scrutiny, that he may not be entirely sympathetic to what they're up to. Joseph?
I've covered a couple of these ballot initiatives and ballot amendments, and it sometimes takes several times to get the Attorney General to approve it. And even if they're successful, they have to get 90,000 signatures from people all across the state. So that includes really rural counties where people might not be following the FOIA story. It's a very tall order, and very few people have been successful at it. But it's definitely possible. I mean, as a government reporter, you very rarely see bipartisan outrage the way you did during the special session. So it could go either way.
Yeah. Steve?
Anybody that tries to gum up this process will be on the side that the popular opinion is not on. So that will be that consideration. David Couch told me that on one of his Zoom calls, Austin Bailey, who is the editor of the Arkansas Times, and Jan Morgan, who ran for governor against Sarah Huckabee Sanders as the far right candidate, they were on the same phone call. So this has widespread across the entire political spectrum. This idea has support.
Democracy. On to another issue. Updated numbers reflect a continuing decline in Medicaid enrollment in Arkansas. The Department of Human Services Secretary Christy Putnam justified the action in a written statement, and may we quote, "Medicaid resources should go to Arkansans who qualify for them, and not for those who are ineligible. I'm proud of the work that staff across our entire agency performed over the past 6 months to ensure that our program is serving only those who truly need Medicaid." But the Arkansas Democratic Party, via Chair Grant Tennille, wasted absolutely no time in condemning the cuts.
We know that somewhere close to 70% of the people who've been terminated were terminated only because they didn't respond to a letter or answer a telephone call. No determination as to their eligibility for medical purposes was ever made on these people. So to say the only people left on the rolls are those who truly need Medicaid, you either don't understand the program you run or you're lying to the people of Arkansas. This needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed now.
Grant Tennille of the Democratic State Committee, Gavin Lesnick, the spokesperson for DHS, the Department of Human Services, responded thusly. The Arkansas Democratic Party's take on the state's successful Medicaid unwinding is a gross mischaracterization of the extensive efforts DHS made to ensure that beneficiaries were ready and prepared for this process. And it has zero basis in reality. DHS began messaging to beneficiaries more than a year ago, before the end of the public health emergency, and has continued this focus throughout the previous 6 months. Throughout this process, we've reached out to beneficiaries by mail, phone, email, and text, made staff available through a call center dedicated to this effort, Josie, back and forth. But it was preordained, foreordained. And we've, about 430,000 now off the rolls. And about 150,000 of those around that are children. Yeah. During that same press conference, Grant Tennille told a lot of stories about people going to their doctor and then finding out that they don't have Medicaid that they were used to. So I think that's a little scary for some people, but the administration is pretty insistent that they're only doing this to clean up the rolls, and they're just giving Medicaid to the people that need it. So we'll have to see what happens going forward. Yeah, Steve Broder?
One thing is that when they go to the doctor and they don't have Medicaid, they can sign up at that point. And that, I believe that visit will be covered. That there is still a lot of churn in this process. There is some disruption, and there would have been some percentage of Arkansans who would have come on and off the rolls anyway during this. This all goes back to COVID. Arkansas, like almost all states, in fact not all states, got extra money from the federal government. In order, and the deal was you had to keep people on Medicaid. Nobody gets kicked off throughout the pandemic. We're now through that process. Arkansas, unlike most states, is doing it in 6 months, not a year. It is true that the majority of those who are getting kicked off are doing it for paperwork issues, did not return their annual paperwork. So it is a messy process, and right now that amount has gotten off the rolls.
Yeah. Andrew DeMello.
Yeah, I think it's clear that Democrats see the concerns about the Medicaid unwinding, not just the numbers, but just the pace of it in Arkansas. Arkansas is required to do it within 6 months under state law. Just the stories that they have and what they're pointing out with it, I think Democrats really see there being a good political message on this. When you think about the number of people who live in Arkansas, 430,000 people, that's a huge number of people, and especially for an impoverished state that has a lot of people who rely on Medicaid. So I think you're going to see, even though the unwinding's done, you're going to see this messaging going on even more as we head into election year next year here.
Well, there's also this too, Andrew, and that many of those 437,000, they're going to continue to seek medical care, which is going to put some additional pressure on hospitals, particularly in the rural area, well, everywhere.
Yeah, and that's a big concern that critics of Arkansas's approach have had, that this is going to have a ripple effect. This is not just about one person or one family losing care. It's about what's it going to mean for the community? What's it going to mean for hospitals in these areas? So they're looking not just beyond just the individual people, but just the larger impact that we're going to see from it.
Yeah, guys, Josie, Steve.
Many people that are off can get back on. Some cannot get back on.
All right.
And may not know it until they go to the doctor. And then some are no longer eligible and they know it, and they did not return the forms because they've got insurance somewhere else. And that is the argument that DHS has been making. DHS has tried to get in touch with these people, but it is a mobile population that can be hard to get in touch with, at least elements of it. This is hard for anybody that's trying to keep up with people. Americans move a lot, and post office boxes and mailboxes change a lot. This has been a challenging process. It has happened in 6 months rather than a year. And at this point, we're still not sure, at this point they're off. They're just off. And either they'll get back on or there'll be a larger percentage of Arkansans who are uninsured.
Yeah. And finally, this issue, Andrew DeMello, we got the first numbers back really on involvement, participation in the Governor's LEARNS Act, and in terms of the educational freedom accounts. Andrew?
Yeah, we've started seeing these numbers coming in, and the LEARNS, the vouchers that these create, this is being phased in. So we're getting kind of a better sense of the impact that it's going to have, but we're in the first year. I think that we're going to see even bigger impact over the next couple of years on it.
Yeah. Josie?
It was interesting in that report is they showed you what percentage of kids at different private schools are getting LEARNS money. If you do the math and estimate, I mean, it's tens of millions of dollars that could be going from taxpayer money to these private schools. And a lot of them are small private Christian schools that I've never heard of before. I know schools like Easter Sills and Access, which are schools for students with disability. Almost all of them are getting some kind of voucher. What was also interesting about that report is it showed that the vast majority of these kids were already enrolled in private schools. And I think that was something that kind of drew contention from a lot of people.
Already enrolled?
Yes.
Which, Steve, that's a subsidy, is it not?
It is.
To them, certainly.
It's a subsidy to the schools and to those families that were already in private school. An argument would be made that this is a 3-year rollout, that private schools will pop up all over the state, and that as more people become eligible, that you will see different opportunities. There'll be maybe a wider range, but at this point, almost everybody that's on, or the vast majority that is receiving a subsidy, was already in school.
Now, this is what critics of the administration's proposal were telling the General Assembly. Have long maintained.
I found a bunch of little private Christian schools, mostly, that have been just kind of popping up here and there, and we don't know what the educational outcomes of those schools might be. They could be really good, they could be really bad. The governor has promised accountability measures, and I think that is one of the most crucial pieces of this, because I'm interested to see what those accountability measures will be for some of these smaller schools.
All right, Andrew, you get the last word. Andrew DeMello, if you want it.
Yeah, I think we had a significant ruling this week related to LEARNS, but not on the LEARNS Act, that seemed to basically uphold the way the legislature has allowed laws to be fast-tracked into implementation. And so I think that was a significant ruling from this week.
Got to end it there because we're out of time. Andrew DeMillo, Steve Bronner, Josie, thanks for coming in. All of us, as always, we thank you for watching. And we'll see you next week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and Little Rock Public Radio.